What's up, everyone? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and I want to take this time out to make a kind of a history video. And it's specifically going to be about my history with PC gaming. It's basically going to cover all the PCs I've ever had or had access to, the times around what the experiences in my life and all took place, as well as the games and how it led me to get into PC gaming as I have now and how I view it now. So overall, I've had, well, I won't say I've had, but I've had access throughout my entire life to 5 PCs and 1 laptop. So that's the main way I'm going to look at it. We're going to start back at the start. It's going to be a pretty long video, pretty historic recollection video. Great start when I can't even English right at the start of the video. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. So back in about 98, 99, computers were becoming a bit more popular, a bit more widespread, and a little bit more affordable. They were still pretty expensive at the time. But I remember coming home from school one day, and there was kind of a tradition, not a tradition, but a weekly, whatever you want to call it, in my household at the time. And my grandparents would always go shopping on Friday night. They would go out to the supermarket and buy all the stuff on Friday night, and then they'd go to a different supermarket every Saturday morning to get what they couldn't get. And I come home on the Friday, and I walk into the kitchen, which is how you enter my house, and I couldn't believe it. It was like, why is all the shopping here like 4 hours early? And then I go into the next room, and everyone's huddled up around a table, and I'm like, what's going on here? And I noticed they've bought a computer. And I was like, I had first previously played an old Windows 95 computer, and hell, even an Amiga or a Commodore 64 if you want to include those. But I'm talking proper household ownership of computers here. And I couldn't believe it, because I had been on my uncle's, well, this was a good while back, but his Windows 95 computer. I had been on his Amiga. I had owned a Commodore 64. So to know that we now have a computer, I lost my mind straight away, and I wanted in on this. Now, this was a Windows 98 computer. This is how old this was. It was Windows 98. It had Pentium 2, 466 megahertz. I don't know how I remember that. 32 megabytes of RAM. I was about to say 32 gigabytes of RAM. It's just, having megabytes in RAM is just so outdated, and it just doesn't register in my mind straight away. I don't remember the hard drive space. I think it was something tiny, like maybe 8 gigabytes or something like that. And it had integrated graphics, so it was pretty bad. It had something like, it was a really weird number. It had something like 15 megabytes instead of 16, because usually they go up in certain steps. And it had a really weird number of available video RAM. And it was something like 14.6 or 15 or something like that. And it was really strange, and I didn't know what was going on. But of course, I didn't know anything about any of that stuff at the time. It was only much later when I learned about that kind of stuff. So I went nuts. I started drawing stuff in Paint. That was the big thing at the time. The fact I could actually do Paint stuff in my house now, it was brilliant. The computer also came with 2 types of software. One of them was the Encarta Encyclopedia, so if anyone from Europe or possibly even America from computers around that time, I'm sure that that name will ring a bell to you and trigger some nostalgic memories. But also it came from one of the old Need for Speed games, and this was, I'm talking, this monitor. Now, this monitor was pretty small. It was like maybe 17 inches. Now, that was huge at the time, but looking back on it, it was pretty small. And, of course, it was a CRT, so this thing was huge and it weighed a ton. And it had a really low resolution, as you'd expect. But I couldn't get enough of the game. I couldn't get enough of... Is it Need for Speed Hot Pursuit that would have been on it? Because I know there was a whole thing with the cops and the spike strips at the time. It was so long ago, I just don't remember. And that game basically did me for forever, for a good while, until a couple of weeks later, when, well, I say forever, but a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months later, when my uncle, the uncle I had previously spoke about, who had a Windows 95 computer, he had actually came up and visited, and he knew I liked games. I was back in the day. he was always helping me play my Commodore. We were playing like the Super Nintendo together, things like that. He knew I wanted to play as Amiga a lot, and whenever I'd go and visit him, because after he'd moved out, I'd always be playing on his Windows 95 computer. So when he came up to see this new not top of the line, but more powerful than his Windows 98 computer, he brought up a couple of games. And that is where I was first introduced to, drumroll, Diablo. And he taught me how to play Diablo that day. And I was hooked for life. That's it. Just plain and simple, I was hooked for life. So there's one other game I want to give a notable mention to that came about from this PC era at the same time. Was one day I was just randomly up in Dublin with my mother, and I had a little bit of money to spend, and we were looking around in a game shop, and that's when I stumbled across this game. And this game I'd never heard of, but I'd heard of something similar in name to it. And then I looked at the back of it and I started reading what was on the box, and that's when I decided I'd buy this game. And that game, which I still have to this day, actually, I'm going to put a picture of it right in a second, is The Sims. And I remember coming home on the train that day, I was so excited to play The Sims. I mean, I refused to put the box back in the bag from the store, because I just wanted to read the box over and over and over. I wanted to look at the pictures till my eyes burned holes through the box. I was just that into playing it. Because I had played SimCity. Believe it or not, I played SimCity on some random weird school computer, as well as the Super Nintendo version. So SimCity and Sim anything, or in this case The Sims, was a big deal to me. And we all know how The Sims turned out. Again, PC gaming and The Sims and this old computer started another lifelong love affair with me. In this case being The Sims as well as Diablo. So fast forward a slight amount of time, maybe a couple of months, if not a year or so. I don't remember the exact date, and I didn't look them up before talking about this, because it was going to be a rambly trip down can't English again, through memory lane. And fast forward to the third expansion for The Sims. So we had The Sims, then we had The Sims, depending on what way you look at it, it's either living it up or liven it up. That's one thing that always remains pretty ambiguous to me. And then you had House Party, which was also great. And then you had The Sims Hot Date, which was the third expansion for the first Sims game. And that was when I ran into a bit of problems. For the simple reason is that is when the system requirements increased. And they basically increased beyond the crappy little family computer we had at the time. So I could still play The Sims Hot Date. I could still play The Sims with all the expansions, all those 3 expansions installed. My only problem was if I went to go to one of the downtown areas in The Sims Hot Date, which was one of the new features of the expansion, my game would crash. I just didn't have enough RAM. It went up to 64 MB RAM minimum requirement. My computer only had 32 at the time, so I was a bit out of luck. Anyway, that kind of put a bit of a damper on things, because I didn't know anything about upgrading computers. I didn't know computers could be upgraded. I didn't know anything like that at the time. So over the course of the next, couple of years, it was basically just playing The Sims, playing Diablo, playing, that's when I found out about emulators for like Super Nintendo games and Mega Drive games and NES games and things like that. So that was my computer for the entire time. Actually, another game we got a decent amount of playtime out of was the original Alien vs. Predator. And I think it was Half-Life 1 as well at the time. So, pretty decent time and pretty good start on it. So fast forward a few more years, maybe, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years later, and I got my own personal computer for school. So my mother bought me a computer at the time, and again, I didn't know anything about it, and basically when we went in to pick it out, it was bought from I won't call it a custom PC shop, but it was like a one-off PC thing where you could explain to them what you wanted and all at the time, and they'd give you different variations that you could buy and all. So we got I think it was like their second highest available at the time, because the top one was just ridiculously expensive. I still remember the specs to it for this day. I had 256 MB of RAM, which was okay at the time, because, For buying a personal school style computer with maybe a little bit of gaming in there, it was pretty good, you know. So I had that. It had a 1.8 gigahertz Pentium 4, single core Pentium 4. I don't even remember if dual cores were around back then, but it was a single core 1.8 gigahertz Pentium 4. 256 MB RAM. Don't remember the hard drive on it. I want to say it was like 60 or 80 or 120 or something like that gigabyte. So that was, it was decent enough and more than I needed really at the time. And there was one thing in particular, because I didn't know this was possible at the time, and I only found out shortly after this, that is when I found out about graphics cards. Because previously I was reading the spec on the old computer when it's like 15 megabytes of video or of integrated video thing. And then on this one, it mentioned a GeForce 2 MX400. I think off the top of my head, it had 64 MB video RAM, which to this day is absolutely nothing. But the fact is that I got this home. I put in all my old games. One thing I want to mention in this one as well, as I spoke before, the previous family computer was a Windows 98 machine. This computer, my own personal one, was a Windows ME machine. Millennium Edition. Now, most people are going to freak out and slate Millennium Edition. Now, I'll get to that in a minute, but it just so you get an idea of what it was. And this computer, when I found out that there was this video card in it, I asked what it was, and the guy explained it to me and stuff. And he goes, "Oh, if you've had a computer before, your games will run and play better." I'm like, "Wait a minute, my games can be better?" So I run home. Well, I say run home, but I go home extremely excited. Now, we didn't bring the computer with us there and then. It was delivered to us. I think it was like 2 days later. But I remember getting that computer. And the guy set it up because at the time I basically knew nothing about it still. And here's the big one. I got all the discs for all these games that either my friend had lent me, because I borrowed a bunch of games from some friends who, because I knew I was getting a new computer, like in the space of those 2 days when I knew I'm going to have a video card, to play games. I borrowed Return to Castle Wolfenstein, No One Lives Forever, Operation Flashpoint, Severance. I can't remember the subtitle of Severance. Severance Blade of Darkness, maybe? I don't know, but Severance. There were just a few games, just to name but a few. And this computer got here, and I lashed all these in, and my friends were here. We were looking at all this, and we were changing these video options, putting everything up to max, and playing these games. It was like, holy crap, this can look even better. And they ran so good, and they played really well. And this is on an 800 by 600 monitor, by the way. 800 by 600 monitor. It was like 17 or 19 inch. It was a little bit bigger than the previous computer's monitor. So I think the other one was 17. So I want to say this is probably a 19. And this was crazy. This computer lasted me a good few years. So I'd say this computer lasted me maybe 5 or 6 years. And then I eventually formatted it and just wiped it all and gave the computer to my mother. But over the course of that time, this is when I found more games and I got experience with more games. This was when I learned about StarCraft. This was when I learned about Diablo 2, a game which I have put ridiculous amounts of hours into. A time when I properly got into the Elder Scrolls. I had previously played the first 2 Elder Scrolls games in my uncle's house because he obviously had his Windows 95 machine, and then he upgraded to a better Windows 98 one down the line, etc., etc. But I had previously played those, and I thought they were okay. I played other random games like Albion and things like that. But then when I found out there was a new Elder Scrolls game at the time, I think it was already out, but Morrowind. And I played Morrowind. I bought that. I played it. Morrowind basically changed. It did the same thing that The Sims, that Diablo did for me at the time. And I still consider to this day Morrowind to be the most important Elder Scrolls game. I mean, most people would say Skyrim, but to be honest, I still think, and not only is it my favorite one, Morrowind that is, but I also consider it to be the most important one because it was the first one with a proper change from two-dimensional style too three-dimensional. And then, of course, in my opinion, they dumbed it down from Morrowind to Oblivion to Skyrim. But it is what it is. Not saying either Oblivion and Skyrim are bad. I've put over 100 hours into each of them, but you get my point. I have literally thousands of hours, and I prefer many of the systems and all in Morrowind. But having said all, I'm not going to harp on about how great Morrowind is. But you get my point. And then, of course, much later down the line, not only at this point was I catching up on all the Sims games and the Sims expansion packs that I couldn't previously play and all, but then it was the Sims 2. They released a full-on proper sequel to the Sims, and this game was in 3D, so it was a big difference and a big deal. And of course, in around the same time, we had Half-Life 2. So naturally, I was absolutely spoiled. And just to throw extra little bit of fuel on the fire, just that extra little bit of icing, Medal of Honor, Allied Assault, which I still consider to be my favourite and the best World War II first-person shooter ever made. I put a ridiculous amount of online hours into that. Back when online here was a 56k modem. I still remember, to this day, the exact day and almost the exact specific time when our first broadband DSL connection actually became available and actually got switched on. I could not believe it. And that basically changed my, not just opinion, but my look on what PCs could do at the time, because I have another video in the works at the moment as well, which basically it's the console version of this video. And of course I was playing consoles the entire time, and it was such a stark difference. The games available on PC and the games available on console, they were worlds apart. I'm not saying in quality, but just the style of games that you had on PC and console versus the style of games you had on one or the other. It was just so drastic and so different. I didn't even think of comparing them. It was just, I want to play everything. So that was a big deal. So that would have been towards the end of 2004, the start of 2005. And let's go forward a little bit more anyway. So I don't remember when I think that computer stopped working, or I gave it away or something like that. I know I gave it away to my mother, but I don't remember if it was in around that time. But let's fast forward to 2006. So I had just got a part-time job in 2006, and I was working on building my first computer. I knew exactly what I wanted, and a new store had just opened up in my town, and this was another branch of like what we call it, an Ireland-wide famous store. It's kind of legendary for its its technology and its components and stuff like that. And I had always bought stuff in their Dublin branch. But of course it was a pain, because you'd have to go up to Dublin and buy something and come back. And I remember once I bought a PC case up there and I had to drag it around Dublin the whole time. It was a huge big box and all. You know how it is. So when I found out that they were opening up a store in the shopping centre that I was working in at the time, I was ecstatic. And I started buying pieces in there week by week anyway, and of course about a month or so after they opened, they put up a help wanted sign, and I applied. And straight away, before I had even left the store, they called me back to give me a quick little mini interview, if you will. And it turns out, fast forward a couple of weeks, I got the job there. It was brilliant. And that's when I could full on go ham into building the PC. And because of what I had experienced on PC in the past from the old family computer and my Windows ME machine. Actually, I forgot my Windows ME story. I'll get to that in a second. But what I had learned from all that, and what I had learned in between there and discovered online and stuff, I decided I was going to build a high-end gaming rig. Now, before I move on, I'm going to touch on the whole Windows ME thing. A lot of people would hate Windows ME. They would think it was unstable, which I'm not arguing it wasn't. But they'd be, they'd have to reboot maybe every couple of hours or something like that. I was a staunch ME defender. For the simple reason is I met someone online who, that sounds really weird, doesn't it? But I met someone online who was also a staunch Windows ME defender, and she taught me the ins and outs and intricacies of getting Windows ME to be stable and run for a long amount of time. For example, there was a few other people in the kind of circles that we ran in that also used Windows ME because it was all they had. And at the time, they would be rebooting maybe 3 times a day, whereas myself and herself would be running Windows ME for like 4 or 5 days straight, not turning the computers off, and it would still be stable. Also, a quick shout out to Final Fantasy XI, which I also got in on during the Windows ME days. I don't know why I remembered that just now. But anyway, back to the main story. So as I was working in that place and I was building my own top-of-the-line computer. I remember getting the exact gigabyte motherboard I wanted. Because I was working in there at the time, I could order in certain parts and all. It was brilliant. I could get exact GPUs and stuff I wanted, as well as a discount. It was great. So I remember the computer I actually built at the time. It was my first and only AMD rig to this day, mind you. I say it was AMD because it was an AMD chip, but I was NVIDIA graphics cards, NVIDIA for life. But I still remember it was an AMD X2 4800 plus. I want to say was it socket 939, I want to say. But this chip at the time was a beast. Not only was it fast, it was dual core. That was a big deal at the time. This was an expensive chip. 4 gigabytes of RAM. Because now I realize this was it at the time when DDR2 was just a thing. So 4 gigabytes of that was it even DDR2 actually? I want to say I think it might have been DDR1. It was either DDR1 400 or DDR2 800. I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, I had 4 gig RAM. That's all that mattered. 4 gig RAM. I had a small hard drive at the time, but then what I did was I replaced it I think it was like a few months later, if even, because I ordered in from work those brand new, top of the line, expensive Seagate. I want to call them Barracudas. Let's call them Barracudas for the sake of it. Those Seagate Barracuda drives. 750 gigabytes on each drive. This was a new big deal at the time, and I got 4 of them. It was crazy. So there was that. That was 3 terabytes at that time in 2006, early 2007. That was crazy. So we had that. What else? The only other important things worth mentioning at the time were my graphics cards, and this was the first time. Not only had I gone high end, top of the line, I had also got SLI. So, I had a GeForce. Oh, what is it? What did they call them? What was the series back then? Oh yes, a GeForce 7900 GTX, 512 megabyte edition. Because you could get 256 meg versions, but you could get an over the top for the time, 512 MB version, and I got 2 of those. So this computer was completely over the top, and it was completely insane, and I wanted it to beast everything, which it successfully did. The only thing it didn't beast, because I didn't have the operating system for it. I was on Windows XP at the time, but it didn't beast Crysis because I didn't have Windows Vista, and at the time there was a workaround to enable Crysis to work on Windows XP with some of the features unavailable because it was a DirectX 10 game. I believe it was the first DirectX 10 game, and the big draw to Crysis and its graphics were DirectX 10. And for some reason, because of that, apparently it wouldn't work, normally at least anyway, on anything that wasn't Windows Vista. So I just didn't bother. I didn't bother looking into getting it to work and to disable the stuff and the workaround and all that. And it just completely destroyed everything. Unfortunately, the computer basically blew up for power reasons because the power in my house is absolute shit. And it still is. And despite even having surge protectors and stuff, it's just absolute crap. Anyway, the computer got destroyed. Long story short, the power supply, the motherboard, and what was the other one? Power supply, motherboard, and the chip all went kaput. So at that point, if you're building or replacing those parts in a computer, you're essentially building a new rig. And I didn't want to do that at the time. So what I did was I had decided I'm just going to buy a laptop. I'm going to buy a nice high-end laptop. Because of where I worked, I got good discount and all on it. But the problem is, high-end laptops back then were still a joke. Laptops now, if you take them into their PC counterparts, they're very, very similar in performance, and you get a great value on them. But this, not so much. It was very expensive because it was a technological masterpiece, if you will, at the time. Funny enough, something about the display, which I'll talk about now in a second on the laptop. It was a high-end laptop at the time. It had it was a Core 2 Duo, not a Core Duo, just a Core 2 Duo. So it was pretty damn powerful at the time. Also had 4 GB of RAM, which was almost unheard of in a computer back then. It was kind of crazy. And it had not just one, but it had 2 hard drives. 2 hard drives in a laptop at the time, around here at least anyway, was also crazy and kind of insane. It was 2 120 GB hard drives. So for all intents and purposes, despite the whole sectoring issue and all, it was a 240 GB machine, which was not bad. And one of the other main reasons I got it was that it had a GeForce 7800 Go, or was it a GeForce 7800 GT Go? I don't know if there's a difference. The model is so long ago. Funny enough, I actually still have that laptop. It barely works, and I haven't turned it on in like 5 years, but I still technically have it. But anyway, that's the point. Two of the other things that made it so expensive. One, it was brand new at the time, and it was the only model in the series which had a Blu-ray drive and a Blu-ray burner. That's right, a Blu-ray burner in a laptop in 2017. Oh, 2007, I should say. I'm sorry, 2007. It was crazy. And to go with that, the fact that you could play Blu-ray on it was that the actual screen was 1920 by 1200, a resolution that even consoles to this day can't hit, let alone 1080p, let alone 1200p, which I think is kind of weird and kind of funny that I bought a laptop 10 years ago with a better resolution than stuff these days is actually doing. Stuff on the console market, at least, anyway. So like I said, that laptop lasted me a good while because I didn't want to replace it because of the relative bad experience I'd had with the downfall of my previous computer. Up until the exact moment when it basically died, it was completely smooth sailing. I had no complaints whatsoever with it. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. But unfortunately, that was shortly after I got that laptop. I actually lost my job. I was put out of work from an accident. But that's beside the point anyway. So for the next while, I just kind of stuck to that laptop and console gaming. When it came to PC gaming at the time, because of that laptop, there was only really a few things I played. I eventually used it to play a significant amount of Final Fantasy XI again. But I kind of went and focused back on console gaming for a while. Eventually, a couple of years later, I think it was about 2010, I started getting bored of consoles. And when I say bored of them, I mean it was more so bored of what they could do, or rather couldn't do, and how far behind they were falling. It was well noted that by that time the consoles were already showing their age, let alone for a couple more years that they actually lasted. And I decided I was going to rebuild a new top-of-the-line machine. So over the next couple of months and whatever, I did some research, saw what was coming out, saw what was available, the performance and all, and the price and all that of it. And I eventually settled on what I wanted. And through a couple of setbacks and all, I actually didn't finish ending up building the PC until late 2012. But of course, I wasn't using 2010 hardware, and I was still staying up and current and all on at the time. Fun fact, I keep all my stuff in such good condition that in early 2012, when Diablo 3 was coming out, about a month before Diablo 3 actually came out, we had a LAN party in my house for Diablo 2 with me and some friends. So I bust out this, at the time it would have been about 5-year-old laptop, my Sony one that I mentioned with the 1200p screen and a Blu-ray burner, and it was still absolutely pristine because I keep everything in perfect condition. It looks like and this laptop is a fingerprint magnet, but I clean it regularly. I keep it in exceptionally good condition. And one of my friends just said, I still can't believe that laptop is like 6 years old. It looks like you just bought it today. And I just think that was funny because, yeah, it is whatever, you know. So that's basically it for when it comes to that. So I kept that laptop perfect until I built the new computer. Not the computer I have now, although still technically the computer I'm talking about I do still have, but not the one I'm using right now. So I built this computer anyway at the time. So what was in this computer? This computer had an i7 2600K, which we all know is one of the best regarded chips of a significant period of time. I mean, when you look at a beast chip back then, you were talking 2600K all the way for like 2 or 3 more generations. And yeah, so 2600K, obviously completely capable of destroying everything. Let's see what else was in there. I had 32GB of DDR3 Corsair Vengeance RAM, Corsair being Bay, so I obviously went with them. Cooler Master half, I think it's 932 case, with a half-size window and a giant fan on the side. Let's see, what else did I go in there? I can't remember the hard drives I put in there. I think I got like 2 1TB drives and just put those in. Let's see what else was on there. Oh, the main important other thing of mentioning is I had what graphics card manufacturer? An Asus, that was it. My 1080 is EVGA, so I almost said that. I had an Asus GTX 690. Now, if you remember, the 690 was a beast. The 690 was the complete destruction of everything, because this was in around the same time it was slightly before when the Titan started actually existing. And for those of you who don't know, a GTX 690 is 2 680s on one card. It's actually an SLI dual core GPU. So it's 2 actual GTX 680s on the single card. So you could technically have quad SLI and put in 2 GTX 690s, and this computer destroyed everything. Absolutely everything. I put on 1080p, everything up to max, solid 60 plus FPS. Now at the time I only had a 60 Hz monitor, so my point was it would stay consistently at 60. The GTX 690 destroyed everything I tried putting onto it. It destroyed Crysis 1. It destroyed Crysis 2 after the DirectX 11 update with the high resolution texture pack. Anything you can think of I put on, it absolutely beasted. And that computer lasted me a good while. That computer lasted me until, realistically, I'll say 2015 was when it started to show its age a little bit. Now, this was in around the time, because this was a year prior, I suppose, to these current generation consoles actually releasing, the Xbox One and the PS4. So, having said that, obviously we all know the issues with the hardware in the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and even to this day, that GTX 690 will still put up a good fight. For example, it will play games better than console level settings at a better either resolution or frame rate. For example, if I put on console level settings, I'll get either better resolution and or frame rate, or I can play them at higher than consoles and still get the same or better performance out of them. So it's still not completely out of date, despite being a 5-year-old machine, but I don't use it anymore. For the simple reason is, when 2015 hit, and I was all hyped up, I got a free copy of Batman Arkham Knight. I helped a friend of mine build his computer, and he got a free copy of Arkham Knight with his GPU. And he didn't care about it, so he gave it to me as a gift for helping him build a PC. I'm like, that's brilliant. You just saved me like 50, 60 euro. That's amazing. So he gave me that anyway. And I was really psyched and really hyped and excited and all. And I remember preloading the game. And I went to play Batman Arkham Knight at midnight launch. And it ran like shit. And I was running the benchmark and trying to run the settings and change the settings and stuff. And this was within like the first 10 minutes. So a friend of mine, at the time at least anyway, we don't talk anymore, he messaged me and he goes, oh, how is it? And I just said, it's like, well, I need to build a new computer. Because don't forget, this was 10 minutes into the launch, so the whole brokenness of the game and the sheer extent of it wasn't fully known yet. So he had a good laugh about it. I was like, yeah, this game is the computer that's finally making me build a new computer, because to me, PC gaming is maxing out everything with a beast resolution and a beast frame rate. That's what PC gaming is to me personally. So I said that to him anyway. I went to bed, and it turns out we woke up the next day, and there was the whole debacle with the Arkham Knight PC port. And that's when I was like, okay, wait a minute, maybe I don't need to upgrade just yet. And then, fair enough, I played a little bit more and played more games over the next couple of months and all. I eventually decided, I was like, okay, hang on. I'm looking at what's available now. I'm still going to build a new machine. And I said, okay, it's going to take me a couple of months to get the money to put up all the parts together and stuff. And roughly by then, the new GTX 10 series should roughly be out by then, or at least have a solid release date. So I decided to build this new computer. I started putting the pieces together. I started buying the pieces roughly the end of 2015, I'm sorry. And I'd say maybe like September, October, I start buying parts and I start doing that. So basically every 2 weeks when I get paid, I'm just putting like 98% of my paycheck into new PC parts. And then at the time I was, what was I doing? I was putting like the other 2% into lunch and just living, basically. Or at least, I should say 98% of my disposable income. There you go. That's a better way of describing it. And when you look at that, and over the course of the next couple of months, by the time I had got everything except the GPU, I was waiting to get the GPU last, for the simple reason I was waiting for the announcement of the 10 series. By the time I had bought the last piece, excluding the GPU, we were at about April of 2016. Now, if you remember, April of 2016 was just before the announcement of the GTX 10 series, which I believe was the end of April or the start of May. But I was so excited for that because, I finally get to build this computer and I finally get to do all that. So that's basically the story of that. And I'm still using this computer to this day. Sure, what? It's only a year later anyway. So yeah, it's crazy. This computer now, it's an Intel i7-5960X, because obviously I realize it's not the optimal chip to buy if you're just gaming, but I'm doing multimedia stuff as well, so I need it for that. You've got your i7-5960X. It's got nothing but solid state drives. There's no mechanical hard drives in this machine at all. GTX 1080 Founders Edition. Beast Corsair power supply. Beast Corsair CPU cooler is what I was going to say. Water cooler. Beast Corsair case. 32 gigabytes of Corsair DDR4. My God, so many letters and all. My two solid state drives are actually Corsair as well, believe it or not. So it's a pretty beast rig, and it still beasts everything to this day. I'm talking 1440p, 90 plus FPS, everything maxed out in every game. It's crazy, and this is what PC gaming is to me. Just recently, a few weeks ago, I had a friend over who had never seen a high-end rig before. He knew about PCs, and he knew a little bit about them, and he knew that PC gaming was where it's at for price and performance and quality, but he had never actually seen one. And he had played games on console. He played games on his Xbox One and on his PS4. I brought him over, and I sat him down. The first game I booted up for him was Doom, because I know he liked Doom, the new Doom, obviously. And I know he liked it. I know he's played it on PS4. And I said, here, play this. So I had previously set it up because I obviously had played Doom. So Doom on my computer runs at everything completely maxed out, including that Nightmare Shadow setting that requires a minimum of 5 gigabytes of video memory. Everything completely maxed out. Absolutely everything. 1440p. Game barely drops below 100 FPS. In an extremely heavy scene, it'll drop to the high 90s. But my point is, it barely drops below 100 FPS. And he was blown away. And he started turning on other games that I had installed. Because purposely, I'm getting a bit into the story and my tongue is getting tied. Not to mention I need a drink from talking so much. But I had purposely installed a couple of extra graphically intensive games that I didn't have installed anyway. And there were some games that were graphically intensive that I had installed anyway. So he booted up The Witcher, started playing that. It kind of basically blew his mind. And the best way I described it to him was, I remember there was him, a guy I used to work with, and another guy I used to work with. And at the time, the two of them would always tell me and talk to each other about how they thought my PC build was overkill and all. And I just said to him at the times, like, this is why you call it overkill. This is why I put this money into it. This is why I do what I do. Because he looked at all these games, many of which he'd played on consoles as well. He booted up Battlefield 4, for example, too. And he was just in awe by the performance and the quality at the same time, as well as what it could do. It just completely destroyed his perception of it. And now he's currently building a PC, and he's getting a GTX 1070, so he'll be pretty happy with that. The main thing he's looking forward to is maxing out games at 1080p, 60 FPS. So 1070 will do him just well. So that's it. That's my perception and my history of PC gaming. That's why I go high end. That's what is PC gaming to me. I have the consoles because overall, while I can technically be described as a PC gamer, I prefer to think of myself as just a gamer, and I play everything. I mean, I'm not gonna disown an Xbox for having, if I only have to buy exclusives on an Xbox, or if I only have a PS4 to buy exclusives, it is what it is. But I'll buy my multiplats and stuff like that on PC to get the best performance and experience out of it. That's what PC gaming is to me. That's why I put a lot of money into it, and that's why I do what I do. So that's it. I'm sorry this video has been exceptionally long with reused footage over and over, and chances are you probably found it a bit boring. I just felt like telling the story of it, and like I said, there's a console video in the works too to make perfect sense of it. So yeah, what's your history with PC gaming? Is it similar to my own if you watched the whole thing, or what's the deal? Is it completely different? Have you just started? Are you looking into getting into it? What's the deal? Let me know anything. Or if you think the story was boring and too long and think I'm an asshole, feel free to leave that in the comment section below. I don't care. But anyway, what's your experience with it? Anything to do with it at all? Leave it in the comment section below. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter. Details in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the rest of the videos in my channel.